Hello and welcome to Will the Doctor See You Now? HCP engagement post-COVID. Priorities have shifted since the start of the pandemic, and there will no doubt be continued changes in access to healthcare providers. And there is no time like the present to focus and identify the best course of action for your teams and your commercial strategies. I have three industry leaders with me today to give insight into this new era of engagement. Please introduce yourselves. Let's start with Melissa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mel. I'm in Bayer and currently working in procurement. So how I got involved in this topic is very passionate for the past 5 years, was leading digital transformation and innovation more on the tech and pharma partnership space. Very happy to join Leslie and Paul. And Randy, thank you for having us today.
Of course. And Leslie?
Hi, I'm Leslie Rotz. I'm the Director of Digital Strategy and Operations for MedThink Communications. And I'm responsible for a variety of digital initiatives across the agency for our clients, including SEO strategy, CRM strategy, UX strategy, you'll notice a trend here, as well as social media management and listening. And very excited to join today's panel.
And Paul.
Hi, everyone. Paul Marasco. I currently am the head of digital customer action for Ipsen. Have been doing the digital/customer engagement for at least the last 10 decades between J&J, Sanofi, and Ipsen. And excited to join Mel and Leslie for the next half hour and chat about HCP.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. So I'd like to start off by asking about the impact of COVID and what was the impact on healthcare providers, and were these effects seen across the board? Melissa.
So when you asked me this question, the first thing that came into my mind, Randy, but that was kind of like a word cloud, I would see the word CHAOS like spelled right in front of me in chaos. That's maybe an understatement. I mean, all of us here, we have friends or customers in the industry of healthcare, and they almost instantly have to probably pivot their operating model overnight. So it's not like, I'm not comfortable with telehealth. This is not my thing. It is a must to actually be so dependent on telehealth in order to continue the consultation as well as treatment for their patients, right? Because it came to a halt almost instantly overnight, where face-to-face is very limited or almost non-existing, right? So I see the impact changes much in the sense of the priority, the types of information, the format of information to their patients, but also to themselves. When I say themselves, it means the HCP themselves, beyond product information. So things such as how to keep their business to stay afloat if they have a private practice, because there are so many issues that's happening in terms of the stocks, in terms of the distribution, how to get the most important information to their patients, as well as how can they commit for events and have the communication and education still flowing if they would not be able to actually attend to an event for example. So these are just tip of the iceberg of what comes into my mind when you ask me the question. But yeah, I mean, my fellow panelists, if you have anything, feel free to chime in.
Sure, I would add one of the things that I say quite often, I have a colleague who says it quite often too, is a reminder that HCPs are people too. So we have a lot of conversations that are focused on what their day looks like, what our typical marketing initiatives to them would be, what our sales teams' relationships with them are. But then outside of that, they're going through a pandemic too, right? And they're in some cases even more impacted because of the industry that they are working in. So the anxieties that you and I were feeling around it, they were feeling those as well, if not exponentially more. So I think humanizing it a bit and realizing, we can actually empathize in some way, just being human beings going through this thing together helped build more empathetic and initiatives, realizing what they really do look like now. Mel mentioned the telehealth thing. I had a telehealth appointment yesterday where my provider was saying, I'm still shocked that I log into these video calls and it works. I didn't do anything like this a year and a half ago, and I was forced into it. just like we were forced into working remotely with our colleagues and finding ways to collaborate there. So I think there's a lot of parallels that we can draw to what we're experiencing, what our families and friends are experiencing, that don't even have to do with the fact that they're healthcare professionals. And that's made it more real, at least for me, when I think about them as my target audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with both Mel and Leslie, but I often said an HCP isn't different. They're a person just like we are. Just because they put on the stethoscope or the lab coat doesn't mean they're supposedly transformed into something else. So COVID impacted them personally and professionally in so many ways. And, I think the great thing about it is, that force that we all had to do from the way we work, the way we engage and interact with anyone, I think helped accelerate at least on the digital side of the house, some of the digital disruption that pharma has been playing with for years, but has always seemed to lag on. So once again, it's been tough on everyone. Empathy, humanizing the situation, is something that I think we should all remember every day.
So Paul, are you seeing trends within the HCP community? Like, are you seeing, reactions all the same across the board?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Randy. We all know that access to HCPs has been on the decline for at least the last decade. And I'm traditionally a sales and marketing guy, even though I spent my last decade or so digital. So I am never going to promote or ever say, we're never going to get in a room with an HCP anymore. That's never going to be the end of the end game. However, things continue to decline, and COVID basically stopped things in its track. Take COVID out of the equation, we're going to get back to some leveling point. When you ask for trends, there was two studies that come to mind here. One, when I just talked about the number of HCPs having limited access over the last decade, ZS did a study. It was late last year or early this year. And their data showed that about 30% of the HCPs across all specialties were inaccessible to the field pharma back in 2012. They said that number went up to 49% in 2019. So this is pre-COVID, getting almost about 50%, which I think was probably right with the low C, no C, and all the institution restrictions, because there's going to be less private physicians, more group and hospital-owned physicians. Mm-hmm. And this study forecasted that by 2025, the inaccessible percentage of HCPs could be as high as 78%. So I think COVID accelerated or made things happen, but the point is, I think we can't blame COVID, or it's not because of COVID. These are trends that are happening. And IQVIA, it was end of Q1, early Q2 this year, polled, an HCP group, and they found out that 87% of the HCPs polled agreed that moving forward, they would expect a virtual / face-to-face hybrid approach to be the norm, not the exception. So that number is pretty telling, because I think if you ask that question, in February of 2020, it would have been, less than 50% that thought that would have happened. And the one thing that I thought was most interesting in that data was that 10% of the HCPs polled indicated that they do not expect, nor do they want to go back to pre-COVID interaction models. So once again, that's only 10%, but once again, I don't know if that would have been a double-digit number, 2 years ago. So there's some trends. I would open it up to Mel and Leslie to chime in, but to me, those numbers show that we need to be aware of this and act appropriately.
Can I chime in, Randy?
Of course.
So I just want to echo what Paul has said. I've seen a couple of studies from Accenture and Google. Everyone is saying the same thing, as in like the healthcare professional as high as 90% is talking about the hybrid model because they're so comfortable with that, in the sense that they'll still be able, first of all, in terms of their patient, I can see my patient as and when in their terms, right? It's because, I mean, if you're looking at the patient, they have so many, for example, their comorbidities, they have to travel, they have to come to the practice and the office and stuff like that. Now, instantly, I can just have more in like kind of like a me time and a real time with them. But on their side as well, the healthcare professional, they will be able to assess, like, I want to see the reps on my terms, right? I press the button, I can have information at that time whenever I want to see them, and not when the reps come to my office, I'm obliged to see them. So that was, I thought, was kind of like very interesting, that came from the study. But also that events, I mean, sure, it's actually great to see people in real time, but there is also a leaning towards, like what Paul has said, the hybrid. I want to able access information freely available, in terms of not interrupting, my rounds in the hospital, for example, my practice. So it's best of both worlds for them. So that's what I see as a silver lining that came out of COVID, that actually accelerated people to be comfortable with digital, even though they were not pre-COVID. This, I think we all agree, that sort of like the force of telehealth and acceleration of digital, even though you're not comfortable or not. So that was pretty interesting.
So you've wound me up for my next question perfectly. So Mel and Paul are definitely in the camp where digital is going to be the new interaction. So Leslie, let me ask you, if HCPs are showing a preference towards these virtual interactions with reps, how do you make adjustments to account for that?
Yeah, I mean, this is music to my ears, right? Because it's job security. I work in digital. That's where I was hoping things were headed. And I think, to both of their points, the hybrid approach certainly existed pre-pandemic. So it's not this kind of new ideology, but it might just be more prevalent now, just because of the feedback that we've been hearing from the HCPs, and also the fact that we were forced into it. And what I mean by that is having a sales team that's obviously able to interact in office in all of the traditional ways, if that's what that HCP is looking for, but they can also, importantly, successfully facilitate virtual interactions. So it's not just about doing it, but it's also about those calls being effective and efficient, right? And I don't mean necessarily just a video call either. If you're using something like Viva, yes, it can facilitate those kind of engaged meetings, those virtual meetings, but it also gives the sales rep access to any resource that they could need. HCP asks for something, they can have it there immediately for them. They could be using Viva CRM in order to send very personalized emails with approved content, modular content, right? So we have all these different pieces that we can choose from. Well, my call with that HCP, we talked about these three. He expressed interest in this one. Let me just pull all that together into my follow-up email. And again, that's digital engagement, right? And then most importantly, all of the data that we get back on those individual HCPs when we are using those digital channels and those digital avenues. So what are they engaging with? What are they clicking on? What are any of the medical insights coming from your phone calls with them? Are you keeping those notes in Viva? And then in some cases, if the organization is open to it, they might have medical affairs colleagues who are also using that same platform, who might be talking to a similar target list, obviously for a different objective, but are we compiling that data together in some cases when it can be appropriate? And what are we learning from that? And that, to me, is when we talk about digital transformation more broadly, that's how it's defined in my head, right? It's these vehicles that have always existed, but are we using them in new ways? And then how do you get your organization to a point where they feel comfortable or they're capable of doing that? Is it merely something that's like upskilling the staff that you had so that they are able to have those successful virtual interactions? Or is it this new procedure for hiring that you're going to use or look for specific skill sets associated with what you know those interactions are going to need to look like from now on. And that's probably different for every organization depending on where they are kind of in their transformational journey.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Leslie. I think, in the whole scheme of things, the technology, the platform, that's the easy stuff. I mean, it's out there and it's been out there. Some traditional things pharma has done, and some things that pharma might be able to use that have not been traditionally pharma, tools. That being said, I think the biggest thing we need to look at is the skill sets, the organization, not just culture that people always refer to, because I think that's an easy fallback. Oh, that's just not us. We're a sales organization. I think it's the how. I mean, what is the training? You're not just hiring the right skill sets moving forward, but retraining and making sure that people appreciate in the organization. There's a way to sell face to face, and there's a way to sell when you're on a video camera or talking when we're on a video camera. And companies have to invest the time and energy to make sure that folks are trained that way. Because a bad experience is probably not because of the technology, it's because you're trying to do what you would do in a room with someone over a computer. And it's that bad experience gives everything a bad name. And I also think, besides some of the comments that were made, it's now the time to really start incorporating the surround sound, as people call it, or the NPP, into the equation. I always hated the term NPP when I joined pharma a number of years back, because I think it really didn't do justice to what we were doing. And now, with the ability to mine data, with the ability to use that in conjunction with the traditional means, I really believe NPP should stand for the new personal promotion, not non-personal promotion. And we should put those together, because 1 + 1 definitely equals 3 in that situation. When you combine what pharma naturally is good at, which is face-to-face selling, and the digital, which was an afterthought, but they're good at, when you put that together, it can be very powerful.
So with this kind of technology, with these new platforms, Leslie, let me ask you, like, how do you ensure that you're meeting everybody's needs? Like, it's gonna be a wide berth of people needing different things.
For sure. So obviously we've talked about personalizing interactions between sales reps and HCPs, and that's pretty easy to wrap our heads around because to Paul's point, the technology has been here. But when it comes to broad sweeping marketing initiatives, maybe a little bit more difficult to figure out, okay, how do I cater to this individual's preferences or what their questions might be? But to me, this isn't actually something that the pandemic changed. As far as best practices, right? We should have always been collecting data and insights on our target audience so that we would ensure we're giving them the correct information in the format they're looking for it, on the right channel, so where they're going to for it, to ensure that we're delivering it, again, efficiently and effectively. Should have always been doing that. I think it's just more prominent now because it's like a need, right? We have this desire from the HCPs for immediacy of content, to Mel's point, relevancy of content, right? I want to see what's going to answer my question. I don't need all of this noise because of all of this information, kind of this influx of sources that we have. So our job is to think, well, where are these specialties finding their clinical information? It's going to differ. Are they going to print publications? Are they going to social media? What format do they want to see it in? Do they want to read the full text article? Do they want an infographic? Do they want to hear from a peer, another KOL about diagnosing a particular disease state that might be, tricky? And the problem is, if you know where those places are and you know what that content is, if you aren't there, what or who is? So what content are they looking at, or whose content are they looking at instead? And then taking it a step further, you know, is that the type of content that's going to help with your own objectives? So making sure that we are building these personas for these HCPs. I'm not saying that we can necessarily do it to an individual's perspective, but at least specialty to specialty, and probably even some of your segments within your target audience, able to build a plan, a marketing mix that's much more tailored to, again, what they're looking for, where they're going for it, to ensure that our messaging is being seen and being understood.
So let me ask Mel a question. Mel, do you think that pharma is going to have to reinvent their relevance now?
They have to if they want to survive to being relevant, right? So I was just thinking, if this question, I can actually divide it into two groups. First of all, the marketeers that handles the brands, right? I've seen that they have to actually move beyond the traditional marketing. When I say traditional marketing is your go-to kind of like roundtable, key opinion leaders, you know, your conferences, but to think about digital influencers. When I say digital influencers is because now we all work from home for 1 and probably more years now. And when I look into my social media, the algorithm that's actually being served to me are, you know, it's just so cool to see all these digital influencers now, you know, on TikTok, on Snapchat. And some are very educational, while some are more lighthearted, just to actually increase, you know, the mood of the community, being things were so doom and gloom back then. So there's actually a new title in town. I'm not sure whether you guys, I just Googled it and it just came straight up. There's a CMSMO now in the industry, which is the Chief Medical Social Media Officer. In the first of its kind, it's Dr. Austin Chiang from Philly, and he is in charge of not only is a gastro and an associate prof, but he's also in charge of the social media account of his entire hospital. I thought that was so cool. There's also Dr. Mike, with needs no introduction, has millions of followers on Instagram, and Sandra Lee, the pimple popper. So I'm just thinking that as a marketeer now, you have to go, you know, kind of like be bold and move above and beyond how you normally, you know, bring your messages and target the audience, because times have changed. So this is for the marketing part, but from the sales point of view as well, we have to look into how we evolve the field model. And I'm definitely with Paul, even though all of us sitting here are pro-digital people, but there's still a place in terms of not going fully remote and, you know, let our sales force kind of like let them go, because they come with a lot of experience and expertise in terms of the therapeutic area, the whole ecosystem end to end, how we can actually use them more efficiently. And I was just thinking for Bayer, as far as I know, we're looking to tweaking kind of like the frequency in terms of how much they are calling in terms of their territory. So when they're off territory, how can we use their time to collaborate more with headquarters in the marketing team, for example? We use them to actually help us to map the kind of like consumer journey, patient journey, HCP journey, also, and help us to strengthen the strategy for omni-channel marketing. So these are just some of the points that I was just thinking of how pharma should look into reinvent their field model, and also the marketing side.
There's a lot of good points in there for sure. And I want to zoom in on the part, which, I mean, you can call it a digital opinion leader, you can call it a social media influencer. Like, the reality is, so I've worked in healthcare my entire career, but not necessarily pharma marketing. I did a lot of advocacy work when I was based in DC. And the idea of a social media influencer is not a new one. Paul mentioned this. There's things that have been out there in other industries that pharma just hasn't traditionally used. And now we're seeing it become a bit more prevalent. I've seen feedback from ad boards that we've held where these KOLs are saying, well, I want to engage with this content, but I'm going to hold back on engaging with a pharma brand page because of the way it looks, right? Like, it's great content. I want to share it with my network, but I don't want to say retweet something from a pharma company or share something on Facebook or LinkedIn. I want to see it from a peer, and I want to share what they're saying about it. So not saying absolutely that there isn't value in having these like brand pages. For sure, we've done that for clients. And I think it's, you know, if it's meeting your objectives, it's something really smart to do. but you can't forget about that influencer piece and how, you know, certain KOLs or HCPs will feel just about the engagement fact, right? If you don't care about them engaging with your content and sharing it, then that's one thing, but that's how you're going to get it in front of more eyes, grow awareness, things of that nature. So we certainly see growing value in having some relationships with these types of influencers moving forward.
Oh, you're on mute.
I thought
Oh,
I unmuted. I
there we
apologize.
go. No problem.
Even after a year and a half, we still.
We'll never get it right. We'll never get it all right. Never.
It was the catchphrase of 20. I guess it still lingers on in 21. I was saying, besides the comments around social and everything that has been said, there's a lot. You can unbake a lot of this into a topic upon itself. I think we need to continue to also just look at how we evaluate traditional type of programs like speaker programs. And not saying we don't need speaker programs, because that peer-to-peer is so important, but we need to evolve so that a speaker program can be provided both online and taped at the same time, and you have everything in place so that it can become an on-demand program. And then you worry about the compensation pieces and all that. But the point is, we have to be open to realizing that the tactic may still be needed. It just needs to be needed in a different form or fashion. And I think that I use speaker programs, but I think you can use that analogy across many traditional sales and marketing tactics that are going to need to evolve accordingly. Every pharma company spends a lot of money on conferences, and it was always amazing that the answer when you ask why is, well, because we have to be there. And I understand that, but in a world of ROI, in a world of let's do more with less, we have to get past the notion of, well, it's because we always did it that way, or we have to. There has to be a value, and who knows where that's going to play out, what version is going to be live, what's going to be hybrid. But we need to be prepared to address both avenues in the most cost-effective, efficient, and more importantly, educational way to help our physicians. And that's going to change by specialty. Just as I think Leslie mentioned earlier, it's not one size fits all. You have to be personalized for a physician, and you need to get down to the lowest possible level. We have to also realize that as we're talking in general state, there is major differences between the different specialties out there. Where telehealth is probably great in some of the comorbidities, it may not be the be all end all for oncology, because eventually you have to have treatment. So we should never get hung up in an absolute as we look to evolve.
That's wise. Thanks, Paul. So Leslie, do you think that the pandemic has shaped HCP expectations from pharma companies?
Yeah, for sure. I think I mentioned it earlier, immediacy and relevancy of information. It's worth mentioning again, more so than ever before. I mean, they've been inundated with information sources for a while now, and that's just a trend that's continued, but we're much more aware of it now, being what they had to interact with during the pandemic. So with all of that, being able to access things wherever they need to, with that comes the kind of availability of things immediately. So you just got to match that as the pharma company. Then, I'll go ahead and say it that goes for both commercial and promotion, but also across medical affairs too. I think it runs a gambit from what we're talking about, which is more traditional marketing and sales tactics, but also I think your medical information colleagues are seeing it as well. With, I don't want to wait for someone to call me back about this query. I'm just going to Google it. And then, you know, my SEO hat goes on and I'm like, well, I can help with that, right? Paid search can help with that. But it's impatience because they can get the information anywhere, and their days are very hectic.
So I want to flip the question a little bit and Paul, ask you, are there new ways that pharma could be or should be supporting HCP offices?
I think first and foremost, and we've talked about it throughout this discussion, we need to really do a better job listening and then adjusting accordingly. I think we use the word on demand. I use the word push pull a lot as a analogy. We have to start realizing that it's not just us throwing information out there and trying to engage on our terms. It almost has become a paramount shift that they are going to seek information, the offices. And it could be with, the company, it could be the field, it could be the MSLs, it could be many, but when, how, and where they want. So we need to meet them in those places. So I think that's the biggest thing about, what we need to do. We need to also make sure that data, pharma companies have a ton of data already. It's the movement of changing from data to report analytics and dashboards to data to inform insights, and be part of the process of what's the next content for the next campaign, or what is the next best actions that we can recommend for the field to engage, whichever, personally or virtually. I think those two things are going to be critical as we bridge forward to help the HCPs. And in the areas where telehealth becomes more of a norm, because I think in some specialties it's going to be, as long as the legislation allows it, because let's be honest, that's going to probably be a big criteria to how impactful telehealth is. It's because of the reimbursement side of that. But we're going to need to start saying, okay, how do you do point of care marketing when there's really not a brick and mortar to point of care at? I mean, these are the things that we're going to have to evolve because the physicians and the offices want us to help. They all want us to help them better treat and educate their patients. But we're going to have to do that a little differently.
Mel, do you have any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what Paul said was very interesting. Just because it's always been done this way doesn't mean it's right, right? He mentioned data. So performance data is really that's going to influence how we use our dollars, because we invest probably sometimes in the wrong thing, just like we have to be there, we have to be present, we have to be seen. But there's also a smart way in terms of how we use data to actually influence how we balance with different channels and with different formats. I think that's very important. And Paul actually mentioned we have so much data, whether we use it, whether we have the right data, it's a completely different beast by itself. It involves legal and IT and so many different stakeholders that it needs to ensure that we're not only having the right data, the clean data, but what are we doing about that actually informs our insights. So I really think this is the right conversation to have for pharma now to be comfortable being uncomfortable in terms of trying new ways and new things, and experiment and pilot, but also scale it up, especially now post-COVID is showing that there's so much value of how we pivoted the quality of information from the field. I think that's very, very interesting. So just learning a lot from Leslie and Paul just from this call.
Great. I hope everyone else did too, because we are out of time, but I really, really appreciate this conversation. It was truly enlightening. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.